All right, so today the focus is on quadrilaterals, and we're going to be talking about the different definitions of types of quadrilaterals. So we start here in the middle with quadrilateral, and you'll notice everything is connected back to this central point. So anything on here that we write about is considered a quadrilateral. A quadrilateral, by definition, is a polygon with 4 sides. So quad for 4, lateral for sides. So a polygon with 4 sides. So everything on here, that's the first part of its definition. So when we say that something is a quadrilateral, we're saying it's a closed figure, all the sides are straight, and there are 4 of them. All right, the first subgroup of quadrilaterals is a trapezoid. When you have a trapezoid, you have a quadrilateral with 1 pair of parallel sides. Okay, so there's different ways that a trapezoid can look. You can have kind of the standard isosceles trapezoid. So these sides are parallel to each other. You can have a right trapezoid, so it has a right angle in it. All right, trapezoids can be what you might consider upside down or sideways. All right, as long as one set of the sides are parallel. The other 2 sides, if you continued them, would meet at some point, right? If we were able to extend these sides, they would all end up meeting at some point. So it's kind of like a triangle with the top cut off. So that's a trapezoid. All right, another quadrilateral is a kite. So a kite is the geometric name for a polygon with 2 pairs of congruent sides, none of which are parallel. So there are 2 pairs of congruent sides, no parallel sides. So this is where you have the figure where you have kind of 2 shorter pieces and 2 longer pieces. All right. And the pieces that are congruent share a vertex. When you get to geometry in high school, you'll do proofs and you'll see why even more of this is true, but for now you just need to know that a kite has 2 pairs of congruent sides, but none of the sides are parallel. So we have none parallel, 1 pair of parallel sides, and then the next group that we have are parallelograms. Okay. Parallelograms have 2 pairs of parallel sides, or opposite sides are parallel. All right, the most common picture for a quadrilateral that is a parallelogram and not one of the other options is when you see a figure that looks like this. So these are congruent and parallel, these are congruent and parallel, but they're not congruent to each other. They can be, but this is kind of your typical one. But this is not the only thing that's a parallelogram, because if you look at the way our figure is drawn, everything down here is also a parallelogram. Now, trapezoids and parallelograms are not connected because you can't have 1 pair of parallel sides and 2 pairs of parallel sides. That can't exist. So if you are a quadrilateral, you are one of these 3. Okay? you'll have one of these three. You'll be a trapezoid, parallelogram, kite, or just a quadrilateral if none of these is true. All right, but if you are a parallelogram, you are also part of other groups, or you can be part of other groups. So one of those is a rectangle. Now, by definition, a rectangle is a parallelogram with 4 right angles. Okay, so a parallelogram with 4 right angles. So even though often when we see a rectangle, we see something like this, right, where one pair is longer than the other, that's actually not part of the definition. All the definition cares about is that we have 4 right angles. So this is a rectangle. This is also a rectangle. Just because the sides are the same doesn't mean it's not a rectangle. If it has 4 right angles, then it is a rectangle. Okay, so that's another subgroup. Okay, and then kind of brother or cousin to the rectangle is the rhombus. So a rhombus is a parallelogram with all sides congruent. Okay, so a parallelogram with all sides congruent. Now, a lot of times what you see for this, for the rhombus, is you'll see a picture like this, okay? But this is also a rhombus because all of the sides are congruent. Now, if you look at the other shapes that I drew next to rectangle and rhombus, they look like a square. And if you notice, both rectangle and rhombus connect to square. And that's because if you are a square, you are also a rectangle. And if you are a square, you are always going to be a rhombus. So a square connects to all of these. And a square, by definition, has 4 right angles and 4 congruent sides. So you have to have the angles and the sides. So when you see a picture of a square, for naming purposes, you should see the 4 right angles and the 4 congruent sides. All right, so if we look down here and giving the name, so here I can see, it might be kind of tough to tell on your copy, so let me zoom way in here for you. And then I'll refocus in just a minute, but I want you to be able to see. Okay. All right, so it's really tough to tell in this copy, but if you look, all the sides are the same, but if you look at the angles, this angle and this one are congruent, and these two are congruent, but they're not all congruent to each other. Okay, so the name that would describe this is going to be rhombus. Right? 4 congruent sides, okay, but not right angles. All right, in B, okay, oh, I'm sorry, let me zoom out a little bit more. I was hoping we could see the angle, but we can't. All right, so in B, this is a trapezoid. Okay, these sides here are parallel to each other. All right, my next picture is a picture of a rectangle. I know it's a rectangle because it has 4 sides with 4 right angles. All right, and then my last picture here, I have, these are congruent, and these are congruent, but I don't have 4 that are all congruent, so it's not a rhombus, it's not a square. I don't have right angles, so it's not a rectangle, so this is a parallelogram. So when you have a quadrilateral and opposite angles are congruent, it will be a parallelogram. This is another definition that you'll prove in high school geometry. But for now, just know that because the sides are not all congruent and the angles are not all congruent, this is going to be a parallelogram. So what you're going to do now is you're going to practice classifying quadrilaterals. Pay attention to the sides and the angles that are marked or not marked. And then make sure you explain how you knew which one it was.